By this point, I have done analyses of 2 characters from the Tales of series, both of which were from my personal favorite entry, Tales of the Abyss. In fact, one of them was the first analysis I've done since coming back to YouTube. In both videos, I made constant connections between the respective topics of each video and the protagonist, Luc fon Fabre, and that is because as much as I love Jade Curtis and Guy Cecil, everything in this game ties back to Luc. It simply would not be nearly as special to me without him in it. He's an amazing character and protagonist, and after putting it off for so long, I think it's about time that I pay him his due and explain what's so amazing about him. When Tales of the Abyss starts out, Luc is nothing short of a sheltered, spoiled brat. As the son of the Duke of the nation of Kimlaska, and the nephew of the king at that, he never had to worry or work a single day in his life, always treated well and given what he wanted. This was only amplified by the fact that 7 years prior to the start of the game, he had been kidnapped by the opposing nation Malkuth and traumatized to the point that he lost all of his memories prior to the event. With that in mind, it makes sense that his parents would want to keep him safe from the outside, but it doesn't change the fact that the child they raised was a self-centered one as a result. Throughout his time in his manor, Luc would spend the majority of his time indulging his own whims and training with the Swordmaster Van for no other reason than it being fun for him. When a mysterious girl named Tyr broke into his home to try to kill Van, however, Luc was taken out of his comfort zone for the first time as a clash between him and the girl led to them both being warped far away. Now, in a different story, I could see this being the point where a journey through the unknown is what helps humble him as he sees the world outside and how life is for others. This is not at all what happens. If anything, Luc's spoiled tendencies get even more pronounced at this point as he's surrounded by those that won't tolerate them. One moment of characterization that isn't actively negative that comes up, though, is when he doesn't wish to kill anyone, even when several people start trying to kill him. However, even then, this serves to show his childishness and naivete more than anything in the context of this game's world, as his lack of will to fight back is actively a burden on his party members whose lives are also on the line. There is rarely a moment where Luc isn't a burden on his associates, including those who would consider themselves his friends, and he shows far too little will to change on his own. Eventually, though, Luc finds himself with no choice but to change when his ignorance leads to him following a plan concocted by Van, without telling anyone else about said plan, under the assumption that it would help him be a hero and save the town of Axariuth. Instead, assisting Van leads to the complete and utter destruction of the town, with very, very few survivors, and the blood of all of those people on Luc's hands. Even then, he tries to complain his way out of this and say that he was tricked into doing it, and thus it wasn't his fault, but at this point, everyone's had enough of him and are ready to leave him. And on top of all of that, the final nail in the coffin is driven in. Luc isn't even a real person, but rather a replica of the original Luc fon Fabre, now going by Ash the Bloody, created by Van on the day he was supposedly kidnapped for the purpose of eventually using him to destroy Axariuth and further his own plans in other ways. It should go without saying that any of these happening, let alone all in a row, would absolutely destroy anyone, and destroy Luc they do. After falling into a coma from a fight with Ash in a despair-fueled rage, and a brief bit of time where his comatose mind got to watch Ash and his former friends try to fix Luc's mistake and stop everything else Van has planned, Luc eventually wakes up and meets with Tyr, who does not sugarcoat what he's done, nor her thoughts on him at all. After having had so much time to reflect as he watched Ash, Luc shows a staggering amount of humility for the first time, admitting that everything he ever did was because someone else told him to. He never made any decisions on his own, and people got hurt as a direct result of his blind ignorance. As Luc puts it, if apologies could bring back all of the people of Axariuth, he'd apologize as much as it took, and if his death could bring them back, he'd let himself die in spite of his fears. But he knows that isn't something he can do, so he resolves to do what he can do. After so much time being so self-absorbed, this is the moment Luc finally starts to truly look at himself and who he is, and he decides that he doesn't just want to change, he needs to. And with that, he asks if he can borrow one of Tyr's knives, and cuts his hair as a symbol of him saying goodbye to who he was, followed by him asking Tyr to stay with him so she can watch him change. This scene is spectacular, but it isn't just for show. Luc indeed takes steps to improve himself and become a better person. Of course, it's not like he immediately became perfect after his resolution. He's still rough around the edges and can say some offensive comments, but his effort is clear in how he's much more quick to apologize for these mistakes now. And while it's slow, he's able to eventually regain the trust, respect, and friendship of his party members, even when he himself thought he wasn't worthy of any of this. Above all, though, he was certainly far more humble than before, sometimes almost to a depressive degree. One aspect I don't see discussed about Luke too often is how after learning he's a replica, he begins to see himself as much less than the original he was based on, and it probably wouldn't be far off to consider Luke depressed at this point. Several times after this revelation, he compares himself to Ash, often to the latter's face, and admits his own faults and shortcomings when compared to him. Luke really takes this revelation harshly and considers himself as nothing but inferior, and when those that knew Ash before he was replaced with Luke say that they still care for the latter, he can scarcely believe it. He even tries to reintroduce Ash to their parents, thinking they'd all want to be together and that he wasn't even necessary. He sees himself as nothing but a replacement that stole the original Luke's life, and for that reason, when the world is under threat of destruction by the deadly miasma covering the land, and only the sacrifice of either Luke or Ash is fated to stop it, he is dead set on being the one to die over the much more important original. As the day of this decision came closer and closer, Luke became more certain of his choice, but also more terrified of the fate he chose for himself. Like I mentioned earlier, he had said to Tyr that he'd die to bring back Xeriuth, but she had retorted that he had no idea what that even meant. Now that he was set to die to save even more people, he truly began to grasp the magnitude of his own choice. He doesn't want to die. He wants to live, not for anyone else, but for his own sake. And yet, he still decides to go through with his plan, not wanting to let Ash die in his stead. By a stroke of near-impossible luck, though, Luke manages to survive the ceremony that was to see him killed. But even though he dodged death, his days became numbered and his death was still imminent. When he learns this, he simply accepts the inevitable and carries on to stop Van, wanting to keep it secret from his allies so they didn't need to worry. The absolute peak of Luke's character development comes into play when he and Ash find themselves trapped in a room together before reaching Van, a room specifically designed so only one of them could escape. While Luke initially tries to let Ash be the one to move on, the latter's rage towards his replacement leads to the two clashing swords to prove who is the better of Van's students. Luke does not take this challenge as Ash had put it forth, however. Instead, he chooses to fight to prove to Ash and himself that he is indeed his own person, not a simple copy of Ash. He is Luke fon Fabre in his own right, and even with the limited time he had left, his life is still his own, no matter what Ash thinks. Ultimately, this is a duel that Luke wins, and while Ash still saw it as the copy surpassing the original, it serves as a statement that Luke was more than a replica in the end. I'm actually going to stop there in terms of the story, as the ending is amazing but intentionally left vague, so it's hard to break down what it means for Luke's character. There is one more detail about Luke that I've neglected to mention though. His physical age of 17 years old is not his mental age. He is both chronologically and mentally 7 years old. At 7 years old, Luke went through everything I just mentioned. With all of that in mind, not only is his naivete contextualized, but his entire character is. He's really just a young kid trying to do his best with the weight of the world thrust upon him, and considering his age and how much was entrusted to him, I'd say Luke did pretty good. Hey, thank you so much for watching. Man, I love Tales of the Abyss, but writing this analysis reminded me just how intricate Tales narratives can be. It was very hard to get everything sorted out for this relatively short analysis. That being said, I definitely gained new respect for Luke just writing this. Anyways, if you'd like this video, I'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe. Hopefully I'll be able to make even more of these in the future. They're just fun to make for me. Anyways, thanks again for watching, and catch you later.